Hello students, welcome to Legacy IAS Academy. In today's video, we are going to discuss about the defense sector of India. And there is general consensus that the defense sector of India needs a policy push. And what kind of policy push is required? What are the major deficiencies in the entire defense architecture, procurement and production of India? Let us try to analyze one by one. Now, the reason why we are discussing this particular topic, because in a very few days, we can say a union budget of 25-26 will be put in the parliament or presented in the parliament. So the question that comes in front of us, that in the context of this particular budget, how the allocation toward the defense sector and how much allocation will we expect, and how this allocation will address the current challenges that this particular sector is facing. Now, the defense industry remains heavily dominated today by the public sector enterprises. We know that in most of the production capacities, production capabilities is with the public process. So the private sector, despite showing promise, continues to play a limited role in manufacturing and the innovation. So basically the question that comes to us is whether we should focus on increasing and enhancing the private sector participation, or whether we should allocate more fund to the public sector enterprises only to ensure their cost competitiveness and to ensure their capacity building. Now, this also becomes interesting because the year 2025 has been referred by the Ministry of Defense as the year of reforms, where various steps are going to be taken. These steps can be as far as restructuring and modernization of defense production, because this is something which we require in all the three arms of defense, whether it is Air Force, whether it is Navy, or whether it is the Army. In the case of Air Force, we take example, most of the fighter jet fleets of India are already on the verge of retirement, and that is why the modernization is the urgent need. Second is streamlining of procurement processes and encouraging private sector participation. As we have discussed, the private sector participation is abysmally low in India if you compare with the countries such as United States, Great Britain and the Norway and the countries of the Northwestern Europe. Similarly, achieving of self-reliance in defense manufacturing is the another stated objective, which also has been emphasized by the Prime Minister of India himself by giving the slogan of Atmanirbhar Bharat. Now, this Atmanirbharta, that is the self-dependency we are talking about, is something that also we have to see and implement in the defense sector. So how we have to design our procurement plans and program, how do we have to design our production plans and programs, all this will have to take into account the element of self-reliance. And the understanding and the importance of this self-reliance we can understand from this particular point, that 75% of the modernization fund that has been allocated to the Ministry of Defense has been reserved for the domestic manufacturers only, and it is a reflection of the government's mission to the strengthening of indigenous production. So these are the major areas along which the Defense Ministry is expected to work in this particular year and even moving forward. However, experts have flagged certain issues. These issues are the over dependency on the public sector enterprises. And from our past experiences, what we have observed, that the PSEs alone cannot meet the growing demands of the modern defense requirement. And the over reliance on the public sector that we have built since the time of independence has brought in a lot of inefficiencies. And this inefficiencies is the reason behind the drain and the pressure on the defense budget, and also the plans and programs are not able to deliver in time. The example we can take is the light combat aircraft Tejas, which was being developed by the Hindustan Aircraft Limited. Its deadline has been postponed many times, and it has failed the stated deadline and all. So the production delay and technology gaps that we are seeing is something that is because of the extremely high scale and the complexity of the responsibilities that falls on the shoulder of few PSEs. And it is due to this reason, the experts argue that PSEs need a proper complementary support, and this complementary support, complementary contribution must come from the private sector, and if we are able to do so, we definitely will be able to enhance our capacity and efficiency in defense production. Now, the question that comes is why there is a lack of private participation in India as far as the defense sector is concerned. So first of all, it has a historical reasons as well, that was driven by the strategic concern. Just after independence, the government of India was not willing to compromise with the secretive technology in the area of defense production, and that is why it was not so much adamant in involving private sector in defense sector, either for the production purposes or for any kind of complementary activities. Now, obviously, in the beginning, with this approach has served our purpose, but in the modern days time, once we have built a sufficient capacity, once we have developed a large standing military and army capacities, the lack of private sector has created a culture of mistrust, and this lack of basically the openness to private sector has created a culture of mistrust, and the private enterprises still feel shy from entering into these areas. Now, obviously, when you talk about the participation of private sector, the two concerns that drive the government mindset is that they are worried that if the private sector enters the defense sector, they might focus more on profit and less on the matters of national security, because as you know, the private industry by design is largely for a profit making purposes. Second is also, if any one or two public private sector companies enter this sphere, they can develop a monopolistic tendencies that will again stifle the innovation, research and development. So these two concerns are what that has kept the private sector at bay from the defense sector. Now, there is not only the issue from the government side, issue is something that we are seeing from the private sector as well, where they are not so much willing to participate in the defense manufacturing. And the reason is because of the prevailing systemic issues. When you talk about the systemic issues, it refers to the government system. For example, there is a large scale bureaucratic red tape that has to be bypassed and crossed if you want to get any kind of approval in the area of defense. Second, has been inconsistency in the procurement process in the defense. And third, there is a limited access to the government contracts as well, that leaves very few choices for the private companies to enter. Now, obviously, here one other model that we can follow is what we are seeing, and that has yielded and delivered the result in the United States, where the private companies have been continuously working with the Department of Defense. This we can see in the collaboration between the Pentagon and the Boeing, collaboration between the Department of Defense and the many such private companies that we have, such as Lockheed Martin, if you talk about. So similar kind of things can be attempted in India as well, where we can have a public-private participation in the defense. However, there is a challenge. The challenge is that if we try to replicate the models of USA, while trying to ensure that sensitive technologies and national security concerns remains protected, this is something that government is worried how it will ensure it. And we have an example of such collaboration. For example, in the case of the development of INS, that is Indian Naval Ship Arihant, L&T, that is a private company, has played a very important role. However, such kind of collaboration in India has been exception rather than the rule. This is seen in very few instances. And one area which can extremely benefit from such kind of participation is the development of AMCA, that is the Advanced Medium Combat Aircraft. Also, if we talk about that, even when we are ensuring and encouraging the participation of private sector, the experts argue that there should be a clear guidelines, and these guidelines should ensure that even if the public sector and private sectors, or the government, defense sector of government and the private sector is collaborating, they should not compromise on national security. Second guideline should be that there should be a fair transparency in bidding, so that the bidding should not be in the terms or on the basis of favoritism. And third, there should be fairness in awarding contracts. That means the corruption should be completely weeded out, and this is very important because we are talking about the national security interest, which is of paramount importance for any particular nation. Now, when you're talking about the public versus private sector, if we look at the defense budget, obviously the defense budget should encourage private sector involvement, but at the same time it is also believed that it is equally important to recognize the areas where public control must remain paramount. Just because the public sector is not able to deliver the results in time and you want to encourage the private sector participation, it does not mean that you should open all the defense areas where private parties can enter. There are certain areas which should be specifically allocated to the public sector, and such areas relate to the highly classified technologies. This can be missile system development, or this can be in the area of nuclear capabilities. Why? Because these are the areas which have a direct implications and direct bearing on the national security. Second area is of strategic assets. When you're talking about the cyber system, when you're talking about the critical infrastructure, these are also something that should be clearly in the domain of public sector enterprise only. Apart from these, in other areas, we can encourage the private sector participation. And at the same time, we'll also have to balance the priorities, and will require a very nuanced approach which is expected from the government. Now, in conclusion, what we can say is, in the beginning we have talked about the concept of self-reliance, that is the Atmanirbhar Bharat, which also aligns with the vision of the Prime Minister of India, Narendra Modi. So it underscores the importance of indigenization that we are emphasizing in the defense manufacturing as well. However, it will not be fulfilled only by having a sufficient outlay of budget or budgetary allocation. It requires a policy thrust as well that translates words into actions. So budget outlay, a proper budget outlay, encouragement of the private sector, and a proper adequate policy to ensure smooth transition is what we require here. And thus, in this context, the 25-26 budget we talk about, it offers an opportunity to the government to outline clear initiatives to boost private participation in the sector. However, we'll have to wait and watch and see that what does the budget holds in the area of defense. However, this is all for this particular video. If you like the video, please hit the like button, share it with your fellow aspirants, as well as subscribe to our channel for more such content. Thank you very much.